Hello, welcome to the podcast. We have the one and only Miss Lynette Zang, who's graciously joined us for today's podcast. We had to get in line because she's so busy and popular, understandably so, but she always makes time for us, which we greatly appreciate her and her staff for doing so. And as always, we're going to delve into her knowledge bag of expertise as it relates to the financial system and specifically precious metals and the global reset with currencies and other things that we've talked about before, and go a little bit more granular than usual. So if you're new to the podcast, please do like, subscribe, and share so that others can gain in the knowledge you've been afforded. As always, we talk about our guests and a little bit about their background. Since Lynette is a returning guest, we don't have to read her whole bio, but basically she has well over 60 years in the financial industry, particularly keying in on precious metals, wealth, growth preservation, and land and resourcing there to become your own central bank, which we are certainly an advocate of, as you know. So we are honored, as always, to have her back. Ms. Lynette Zang, thanks for joining the podcast. How are you today?
I am great, and thank you for having me back, John. It's always a pleasure to be here, as you know.
Yes, and we don't take it for granted. So thank you for being here. Okay, so Lynette, the first question out of the gate is, there are several theories as to why gold and silver has been leaving the Bank of England and the LBMA from tariffs, and discussions about toppling the European banking cabal. What's your theory on why that's happening?
Well, the reason why it's happening is because in the US, it's primarily contracts, not the physical metal market. And because I think it's becoming more apparent to people, and especially at that top echelon, that we are transitioning into a new position. So just like we've seen the global central bankers buy more gold than they ever have historically, because, I mean, frankly, who knows more about what they're doing to their currencies than they do? I think there are some people at that very high level that are actually repatriating gold in the US and bringing it over from England, from the Bank of England, which could be setting up quite an interesting little battle coming up. But I think it's more than just the tariffs. I think that it is also about repatriating gold, because those entities that typically would have just traded their contracts and made a little bit of money on it, why are they taking possession?
Well, I agree with you. And also the fact that I think the tariffs are sort of an optical placeholder for what's really going on behind the scenes. We see now, you and I talked forever about when gold hits 3,000, that's an important demarcation. We're well past that. And now we're over the $30 silver mark last year, and we're seeing it threatening its all-time highs last year. Again, just to recap. And so, you have this inverse effect, with the tariffs, where you're seeing everybody talking about the interest rates, but it's really a sign of the treasuries going up and how that affects the silver market. So it's a misdirect, it would seem.
I would absolutely agree with you, because it really is about perception management.
Yeah.
If you manage how you perceive things, they can manage how you move forward, which is getting you to volunteer so much easier than showing their hand. But I think some of that could also be happening, as you and I are sitting here and speaking about it. There is a huge disconnect between the metals markets. There's a finite amount of it in the ground, above the ground, in any way, shape, or form. But there's an unlimited amount of those digital contracts. And I think that difference is coming home to roost. And while I could not sit here and say that I think like the CME has absolutely lost control, because I don't think we're quite there yet. What I see is them trying to broaden their net of who can come in and participate by issuing smaller and smaller contracts to get the average public to start trading. I mean, I read an article the other day that I thought was just, the headline alone was so interesting, in that gambling is no longer investing's evil twin. No, because it's all gambling now.
Yeah.
So, why not just make it more obvious?
You would think, particularly, Lynette, also as we uncover the curtain for people, which is what we're wholly tasked here to do, you also see that all the investors, whether it's corporate or retail, are calling in the naked shorts. They're calling the bluff on these COMEX and LBMA. They're not able to naked paper short this stuff anymore. So they're going to be forced to let it go, especially at the the 8 banks, you see, 145 branches in the last 5 weeks. And what I thought was also particularly interesting, Lynette, to talk to you about is look at the branches. You could say on one hand, optical, oh, that's to reduce cost and redundancy. Is it? Or is it more of a case of wealth management centers at those banks that are going to be facilitating the new global reset, and they're just not telling you that? It's a sleight of hand. I think that's more to the point. So with that said, and of course, I know this is redundant, but let's say for the sake of redundancy, just for the new audience members that we get, you and I are both proponents for all these reasons to do what you have physically in your desk, to take action, and above all, change your mindset. That's critical. So with that said, when do you envision that gold and silver will run out of some of these bullion exchanges? Will it collapse, or will it cause a collapse of the world's financial system? Or do you envision a more gentler end where force majeure is declared, the exchanges close, and gold and silver are allowed to move at a more fair and equitable price? Folks, for over a year now, we've been extolling the virtues of buying precious metals. As you can see, Fort Knox is about to be audited, and that's imminent, and you're going to see that gold reserves are little to none. What do you think that'll do to the price of gold? And with silver being ransacked with COMEX on the markets, that's sure to follow as well. The only question is, are you going to take action or not? If you haven't, what are you waiting for? And if you have, please take a moment to visit one of our great sponsors here below, the link in the description, and call for the information. It's free. The consultation is free. The cost of not taking advantage of this has lasting consequences, folks. Please tell them John and Chris sent you. You'll be more than happy that you did.
Well, I do think that the preference would be the force majeure, but I also do think that what we have ahead of us, not just in the gold and silver arena, but in the general financial arena, is a huge crisis. And everything right now is, one day there's tariffs, one day they're going to postpone them, they're going to go over here, they're going to go over there. There's a lot of confusion that is happening throughout the entire global financial system right now. And that sets up easily a mistake or not a mistake. I mean, I can't really say what is a mistake or what is not, what's the intention and what is not. But it looks like the upheaval that's taking place across the entire spectrum of the financial markets, while the banks are making incredible profits because of all of this, I don't know, trading opportunities. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you're watching markets pull back significantly. You're watching the gains in the banks kind of explode, isn't that? And then we're going to the bullion banks on top of that. I mean, right. Yeah, we could not be living in times, but I think this sets up a huge crisis because I think it's becoming more and more obvious that the emperor has no clothes. And, yes. And it's all based on confidence. So, and that confidence is declining. We got another confidence read on the consumer just recently, another decline. So.
Well, I agree with you on that in all the aspects you're talking about, particularly just to highlight a couple of things, if you don't mind, is it's particularly damning for the deep state. And it's really good for us who have taken action in these channels. You had said to me, just to show you my recall is that you want to see more of the 1% grow to 4 or 5%, more of a seat at the proverbial table. By taking these actions and seeing the deep state dismantled, seeing the banks fleeced, having the emperor have no clothes, I think that sets up a very exciting time we're in and an opportunity to do that as you are proactively positioning yourself properly. And we talked about the banks for a second, so let's drill down on that. We know why the 8 banks are suppressing gold and silver, or trying to, but we now have established the jig is up. The real question, I think, Lynette, is how much longer can they keep this up and get away with it?
Let me grab my. How much longer can they say?
I love that thing.
I know. Ask again later. That
lunch.
Right. That's the $10 trillion question.
Uh-huh.
I don't really know, but it wouldn't surprise me if the jig was up this year within, by the following December, because really, how long can they stretch this out? I think a critical piece in here is if other governments request their gold back from the Bank of England, then what? I mean, seriously, then they're going to have to go out into the open market, buy what they can get, and then figure it so that it's good delivery, I mean, I think that's what I think that'll be the nail in the coffin when we start seeing countries ask for their gold back from the Bank of England, because they're not going to be able to deliver.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I would even drill down even further, Lynette, and say that surmise that it'll be within the next 3 to 6 months, because you have President Trump, which will lead to my next question, talking about the transitory process or transition that we're going in the economic system, particularly with Doge and all the fleecing of nefarious monies we've all known, but it's now coming to light for the public to see. It's all, to me, leading up an inevitability over the next 3 to 6 months as we make this transition, which goes to the question, do you think President Trump wants to crash the system so he can implement a gold-backed standard? Because we're seeing Europe basically trying to implement that CBDCs, but it's not being done here stateside.
Right. I hope so. That's really what I'm saying is, we have to get rid of this debt. So these transitions are never easy, they're never light, and they're never invisible.
Right.
Some parts of them are invisible, but most of it is not invisible to the public. And I'd been saying really since the end of last year that I think we're going to see inflation really rear its ugly head again in June. So your timing could be more accurate. I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of leeway, but time is going to tell what that timing actually is. I do agree that I think that this is the best chance that I've seen in my lifetime of getting a gold-backed currency once again. So I really do hope so, and we can push that if we can get even 3% of the 8.4 billion population to convert their garbage fiat into gold. We've got to have a seat at the table, because as we've seen with Zimbabwe, even if they say it's backed by gold, if you can't convert it into that gold, how do you know?
Right.
So I would love to see a gold-backed currency. I know at some point we will see that, because that's what always happens 100% of the time. When confidence is lost, they use gold to attempt to regain that confidence. But it has to be convertible, or like we're seeing in Zimbabwe, the population is just not adopting it because they don't believe it.
Well, a couple of points to your point, right, is one, timing is timing, but I think the point of our thesis is it's going to be sooner than later, because there's just this accelerated inevitability, right? And I'll talk about Zimbabwe at the end. I've got something to show you that I think will show you why that country is going to be so prominent here in the not too distant future. Not the way they are, but where they're headed, much like us. And so going back to President Trump for a second, I've seen articles where he is talking about ending regulations on mining. Even with these changes, there's been serious underinvestment in precious metals, as you know, for the last 20 years. How fast do you think the industry can ramp up to meet the ensuing demand, especially the year after year silver deficit that's happening?
Boy, you're asking some really good questions. These shifts take time. I mean, they just do. You can't snap your finger, and then what's the equipment that you need? And
Right.
what's that going to cost? I mean, the all-in cost of mining has been exploding, along with everybody else's costs of everything as well. So to rejigger a mine, to have it be able to, pull. Now, the good thing about silver is in many cases a byproduct of copper or gold mining, but still the all-in cost of mining, boy, I mean, it'll take a hot minute. I would imagine it would probably take a couple of years anyway, or more. But
No, I mean, I think you're probably more right than wrong, or more right than not. But I guess I had a guest on earlier today, and his theory on this, I'm really keen to get your take on the follow-up to this, is he thinks that where we're headed towards is nationalization of the mining. Is that possible?
well, it is. And by the way, it's just another name for confiscation.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
seeing the royalties that the governments are charging miners go up, and the fact that there are a number of countries that they have to sell 20% of their output in the local currency that's being hyperinflated away. So to see a general nationalization would not surprise me like at all. In fact, Ernst & Young runs a report on the threats to miners, and they run that on an annual basis. I haven't looked at that just recently, but I can tell you that particularly after 2008, the number one threat to miners was mine nationalization. And whether they nationalize part of it or they just keep charging, higher and higher fees, or they just nationalize all of it, makes a whole lot of sense. It just does. Because desperate governments do desperate things, and they all know that gold is sound money. They all know that.
And silver.
And silver too, right. Primary
Yeah.
currency metal, secondary currency metal, but what they reset the currency against. So, I personally would not be surprised to see an overt confiscation, because everything that you and I are talking about right now, whether it's royalties or nationalizations or taxations or what have you, that is all a form of confiscation. They just don't want to say that word because
Right.
you go, wait, what? Confiscation?
Yeah.
But I mean, we've done it in the US 3 times. The last time was 33. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I have a Confederate bill here somewhere. That was one of the times, the Revolutionary War. Here it is.
Interesting.
What can I buy with this? Nothing. And I don't even think I paid very much for this, maybe $5, something like that. So, yeah, I think that an overt confiscation is a high probability.
Well, it's interesting you brought out that treasury note, because I don't know if you saw, Lynette, but I believe it was Fidelity is now going to do a digital dollar backed by treasury notes and assets. So that would seem to suggest that we're making a shift. But let's go back to sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, today I was just reading, or yesterday, President Trump and his cryptocurrency company is
Right.
bringing out the USD1. Again, backed by treasuries and dollars and other money-like or cash-like instruments. So, and that if you look, I mean, the stable coin have exploded. There's tons of competition in that arena right now.
Well, I think there's a good reason for that, Lynette. And we're going to go back to our subject here with the nationalization in a second, but you've touched on a really important point. I think what we believe he's doing is he's just trying to use a visual example. If you were at a club or something and you had the engineer with the mixing board, and he's leveling out the different levels for the respective instruments. I think President Trump in that same example is doing, if you can visualize what I'm talking about, is he's leveling up the stable coins against the digital dollar with the treasuries by bringing a gold standard, removing the debt, because I think the consumer debt against the 36 trillion is only about 10 billion, which is easily solvable. I mean, Doge has found, I don't know what, so far it's minor in the big scheme, but we know it's going to build is, I think, what, $250 billion so far, and that's only going to continue to grow and matriculate. So I think that's what he's doing, is leveling it all up ultimately to get to a gold standard in all of its different idioms. But going back to the nationalization for a second, what can miners do to mitigate that issue? And if I'm hearing you right, wouldn't that ostensibly mean that this is the perfect buying opportunity for precious metals in case that were to happen?
100%, 100%. And what can miners do? They can become their own central banks too. I mean, John, this is why, this is a bullion coin, and then I have a couple pieces of bullion on this bracelet. This is really all the bullion that I personally own, because I was alive when you couldn't own more than 5 ounces of this before. So there's always a strategy to do it. They have to, the way that I'm doing it is I'm doing it with the collectible gold coins, because I believe there is a level of protection, since this is regulated by the manipulated spot market, this piece of bullion, right? So make that look however they want to. And we all know that they've sold so much So much gold and silver that does not nor ever will exist. That's explosive. I mean, think about it. What if this is the only kind of gold that you as an individual can actually hold? What if they do nationalize the mines and that means that no more of these come out? Like in Zimbabwe, for a minute, they issued 1 ounce gold coins.
Hmm.
They don't talk about that anymore. I don't know if they recalled them. I couldn't find that data. But when did they do that? They did it to make sure that those that had money could retain their money. So, yeah, that means that supply demand, it's explosive. And there's no doubt in my mind, but a modern day gold rush on a global basis has already begun.
Yeah. And again, we'll touch on Zimbabwe towards the end of the podcast. But, uh, you know, as you're dealing with whatever you want to call it, a transition, a merge, I call it a global reset. It's inevitable that it's all coming to the middle, and you've got to have this crossover if we're going to get to the other side where we all want to get. And again, underscoring the point about changing your mindset and taking action just gets reinforced once again. So let's turn our attention, Lynette, to another issue I'm really keenly interested to talk to you about. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it as they should. We've touched on it before, but let's dive a little deeper today. And I'm referring to the housing and community market, because I know you're all about community, and that's part of becoming your own central bank, as we touched on before. As you're aware, the commercial real estate market already started its well crash or descent last year. You can just look to malls for that. Commercial real estate property tells that story. But what I found interesting is we're now starting to see the beginning clear and present cracks within the firmament of the residential housing market. With a glut of properties and land for sale and not enough buyers, you have a supply and demand issue. This is forcing massive price reductions across the country, especially in states like Florida, Texas, Kentucky, and Tennessee, to name a few. So as we continue through the summer and beyond, Lynette, would it be reasonable to say that the market is now officially shifted from a seller's market to a buyer's market? And if it has, how much of a drop in terms of percentage do you imagine we'll see?
Well, I think that part of it kind of depends, because at the same time that you're getting that information, John, and I always think this is so interesting. A report just came out that real estate prices on homes went up this month like 4.7% or something like that year over year. So there's a lot of conflicting information that you're getting. And what is true? Well, what is true is that all of the layoffs that are happening, not just at the governmental level, but it's kind of like a domino effect
Uh-huh.
to all of the people that worked in private agencies that supported the government work. Okay, well, now they don't have that anymore. Plus, a lot of the stores like Kohl's and Joann's, and there are a number of other stores that are closing now. What does that say about the residential market? People taking out loans with interest rates up at this level, which my first house, I think the interest rate was like 12 and 3/4. That would have been 1978, right? But the house
Mhm.
was $59,000. You see the difference?
Yeah.
Today, you've got that 6 or 7% interest, but the house is just like my little starter home that I had, 1,800 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a family room, and a living room, dining room. That same house probably right now in Florida is going for, I don't know, 500,000. So yeah, are the cracks showing up? Yeah. And as people lose their jobs, their ability to pay that mortgage becomes really a lot of a problem, which is why I think DoorDash and JP Morgan Chase are getting into the buy now, pay later kind of space, because people are really struggling already. What does that do for residential real estate? And globally on average, keep in mind that during the reset, and I'm with you, I've been calling it a reset since 2009. During these periods, globally on average, 25 ounces of gold, as we go into a hyperinflationary reset, 25 ounces of gold could buy an entire city block, buildings and all. This is the opportunity, because all of that, look, you print all this stuff, it's got to go someplace, right? And
Right.
once they print it too, it doesn't evaporate, it stays in the system, pushing up the nominal price, that dollar price that you see of these assets. But everything other than gold and silver are so severely overvalued. And keep in mind too, these are not a true, and I think that's where we're going to get to. So that really supports your point. But these are not true supply and demand markets. These are trading markets. And that's part of the problem that they're finding, meaning like private equity or in the fund businesses, et cetera, that the money is just not flowing in like it once did. And you got to keep new money coming into every Ponzi scheme. So you're looking at whether it's residential mortgages, commercial, certainly, yes, severe overvaluation, we're going to see that plummet. And if you hold your purchasing power, you're going to have the ability to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. A couple of things, if I may, Lynette, to your very cogent points. A lot of gaping, and I say this to support your point, a lot of gaping holes in what the legacy fake news media tries to do in terms of the confusion of the misdirect, right? And not to mention the CNBCs and all the Jim Cramers of the world who are so, whatever he does, I just do the opposite. Quite frankly, I just go contrapuntal to him, and I'm sure you do as well as your audience. But some gaping holes that we need to expose in their fallacy. Number one, you touched on it. People are losing their jobs. They don't have jobs. How are they going to pay their bills? They got credit card interest through the roof, and credit cards maxed out to survive from the glut of last year's debacle, right? Then you have an inventory oversupply, just like you do in the car markets. So these industries are mirroring each other. It's not a one-off. It's reciprocal down the line, right? And then you have, when you bought your house, I think you said 78, that's after we came off the gold standard with Nixon and Kissinger. That's a big demarcation. We're now, I believe, reverse engineering the process whereby by what I think President Trump is doing, and I just this is on our own rover's eye, if you will, but by drilling, by using the tariffs as a negotiable trade tool with these countries, right? Like Venezuela with the oil part there, it brings it back stateside. What does that do? That drives the cost of energy down, drives diesel down. What does that do? It drives it down at the grocery stores. What delivers to trucks? Diesel, groceries. So you start to see a drop off to counter the hyperinflation, right? Then you bring in the gold standard, which levels out the actual dollar. We go away from a Fed dollar to maybe a US Treasury note or some derivation thereof. And now we have a actual physical weights and measures like we did. And with the $150,000 and no taxes, you remember when they started the Fed, because I know you're a historian buff and you have much more knowledge than I do. How did they start? They started back then at the richest, most affluent people and worked their way down to the common people. He's reverse engineering the process because 85% of the public makes 150,000 or less. Then he can go upwards and start to scale it down to the corporate side of things. So it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint, but there's no way they're going to convince me or you that the housing market is seeing an uptick when we're seeing the index go below 50 on the housing markets, and you have some of the reddest states being affected. And I'm even seeing it here in California because a lot of industry is moving out. You have Toyota and a lot of Chevron is moving out of California. How many jobs does that displace of people? And you death by 1,000 cuts, you start affecting the commercial. It has no choice but to affect the real estate and the income bracket markets here in California because people want to go to states where jobs are plentiful. So it's got to effectuate the housing market.
I'd like to make a point based on something that you said too, because I don't think it's that easy to have an impact on the prices, though ultimately it very well could. I think that before we get to that reduction in prices, we're going to see some price spikes. And what I find really interesting, because I've been saying this, right? Whatever tariffs go through, and I'm not saying whether it should or shouldn't happen, I'm just saying this. Whatever tariffs go through, that raises the price. So any of those goods that are created domestically, that actually gives those manufacturers some room to raise their prices, even though their costs may or may not actually go up. So when we were talking, or when the talking heads on TV were talking about Freeport McNamara, which is about copper, right? And
Right.
that was actually what they said. The stock went up as President Trump talked about the 25% tariff, that they might put those tariffs in sooner than they were talking about, because then the corporations. So I don't think it is just boom that prices are going to go down. I think prices are going to go up a lot more before they go down, or the hyperinflation kicks in. And what does that do to prices? Because that just means that this has lost the rest of its little teeny bit of value that it has. So we have to keep that in mind as well.
No, you're right, because it's got less than a penny of value on the Fed dollar anyway, which is neither federal has any reserves. And I think there's a compelling point you make, Lynette, with inside of that, because it's sort of a mirroring effect. If you look at the stock market, right, it's going to see a spike before it sees a drop, a stair step, if you like. And that would make sense to be concurrent with the real estate market. But I do think once it gets above 30%, it's going to just, if it 30%, it goes up again, then it's just going to go way down. It's just going to just create this reciprocal crash, which we have seen before. And I think it's going to mirror 2008, but much more aggressive this time.
Way more aggressive. I think 2008 is going to look like a walk in the park.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, because you're a numbers person, 17 years almost to the day, 2008 to now. I mean, it's pretty, because, future proves past. As you've noticed, Lynette, tier one banks are experiencing, we talked about this earlier, 145 branch closings for major banks across the country in the last 5 weeks alone. So my question is, what does this signal to you in terms of stability for the banking industry? And would you be looking at tier two community banks and credit unions as a safer alternative?
I would actually be looking at them as a safer alternative. And whether I think part of what they're trying to create here is the inability to create a bank run. And really kind of forces people into different areas. And yes, I do think that there are smaller community banks that could be safer, but the problem is that they're all dependent on the commercial banks. So it's got, you be your own bank, right? I mean,
yeah.
The money strategy that we execute is built in layers, and part of that layer is to hold some of this stuff, because even though I know that it's losing all of its value, this is really, people recognize this first, right? So you gotta have some that is the first part of it. And that's what I would say. Outside of the banking system, you have to hold sound money too, because you can convert this. You can convert this, right? And even if you're using this to barter directly with, which is what happened if you look at the sovereign debt crisis in 2014 in Europe. I mean, that's how a lot of people survived, was through their sterling silver that they had. So
yeah, I remember 2012 when Greece took it in the shorts. I remember that very well. That was, to me, that was a microcosm of what was coming to this point today. That was like a micro fraction, if you will. Last couple of questions, Lynette, and I said we're going to talk about this towards the end. So I'm going to also show you some slides to accompany this. So I want to show you this slide real quick, if I may, and articulate on the point. With respects to BRICS, we saw recently President Trump's successful dealing with Javier Milei, president of Argentina, regarding a zero tariff or sanction reciprocal trade deal. As you'll know, many people forget that reciprocal trade just means mirroring, in that if they don't charge us tariffs or sanctions, we will react in a similar fashion. With that in mind, it's our team's strong but humble contention that this seminal example will provide the baseline for how President Trump deals with the BRICS nations in order to make deals and power up their respective currencies, while at the same time securing the new gold-backed U.S. note, providing these countries with their own level of sovereignty. An example with that here, as you can see on the screen, President Trump getting ready to meet in the not-too-distant future with Xi Jinping, probably after April 2nd, Liberation Day, as he quips it. So with that in mind, you have the Ukrainian-Russian peace deal kind of in the crosshairs. This seems to be following up the rear as it relates to China, Taiwan. Does this seem plausible to you, what we were talking about? And what is your assessment of the overall situation at hand?
Well, overall, I think that is really a smart move, because I do see that what President Trump wants is reciprocal, whatever that is. So if there's tariffs or if there's no tariffs, and that is, frankly, in my opinion, the way that it should be.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that it's actually pretty smart, because in meeting and dealing with each one of these entities in and of themselves, in some ways, perhaps he is eliminating the ability for multiple countries to create a kind of union against the US. So
Right.
I think that that could be actually a pretty smart strategy. However, keeping all of this in mind, the reality is that we have to reset the system, because the foundation of the system, which is debt, is not payable, and
Right.
interest is compounding at a higher and higher level, and the lack of confidence in wanting to purchase our treasuries anymore, the US exceptionalism. Yes, the dollar's still used primarily in trade. However, having said that, that can easily be fixed with the SDR's substitution fund. I mean, they can change that in about a heartbeat if they want to. So
Right.
I think what's happening is, yes, we've got to level the playing field, and the public has to be a part of that playing field.
Yes.
Because it's just been, this is, what did George Carlin say? This is a big club and you are.
You ain't in it.
Oh, we need to be in it and have convertible currency. You don't like what they're doing, you can pull the gold out. Means that the public, again, will have the tools to hold politicians and those that are in power
Accountable. Yes, I totally agree. And I think you're right, because I think that's sort of the construct of what we were getting at, Lynette. If you, the picture we're trying to paint with you from the team's contention is, it's like, I don't know if when you were a kid, if you remember that game Operation, where you had to pull the little bone out without setting the buzzer off. I think that's ostensibly what he and the military, the Patriots, are doing under President Trump's overall governance. Is it allows them to reach a balanced tipping point whereby you allow the BRICS currencies in the, we'll call it a basket for lack of a better term, to power up their assets in the ground, be a level playing field without compromising the integrity of the new dollar. I don't think it's going to be the Federal Reserve, because it's not sustainable, and that's not the people's money. And it's the best way, we believe, to get the people a seat at the proverbial table that you're rightly discussing. So I appreciate your feedback on that. A couple of other slides I want to show you real quick. I thought this was pretty intriguing. You can see President Trump moved the Declaration of Independence into the Oval Office. Now, some people may think this is just for optics or a marketing tool. We don't think so. We think that it's a pretty clear tell. You see all the gold, obviously, around in the paintings. See, remember, Andrew Jackson was second president to remove the private Western Central Bank. We believe that's why they were trying to take President Trump out, because he's going to be the third president in history to do that. History repeats itself. So we're seeing this precipitate again. And then I want to show you, before I get your reaction, I want to show you this regarding Zimbabwe, because I've been kind of hinting at this. They are now under corrupt leadership under Emerson Mnangagwa. No big surprise, just like we're seeing with everybody else. That's why I think Javier Milei is so intriguing, because he's been for the last year highlighting a spotlight on Argentina as the baseline, we believe, for how he's going to govern the rest of these countries, as we alluded to earlier. So with respect to Zimbabwe, I'm sure you know this, they're ahead of the US in gold reserves, which is pretty intriguing. There is a peaceful demonstration going on right now within the country to oust said Mnangagwa, who does not have the people's interests at heart and has been maintaining them down with a worthless Zim bond at this point, or Zim note. But once Nelson Chamisa, who, if you look at the comms we showed you before, is the President Trump of that area, talks about peace and prosperity, talks about infrastructure, talks about agriculture, talks about them being the gold standard of the world. Lots of comms, if you can read, like you and I, between the tea leaves. So I think we have to be careful in looking at Zimbabwe or nations like that, because what was doesn't necessarily mean will be where we're headed. And it really poses a very great opportunity for Zimbabwe to break free out of the enslavement they've been in. So would just like to get your take on that.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. That's all of us, right?
Yeah.
This is the best opportunity. I'm 70 years old. This is the best opportunity I've seen in my lifetime to really have the people take the power back. it's not just one place that this is happening. This is a global issue. That's why it isn't just, I think local community is extraordinarily important because I've been working on, as you know, my mantra, food, water, energy security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter for a very long time. And we don't have that time left. So bringing the talents and bringing the gifts that you have into a community so that you can come together and create security for everybody, right? But on a global basis, it's much bigger than that because we do need a sound money throughout the global financial system again. And whoever really does that will be the leader. But what if we all do that at the same time?
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that because what you're really talking about is a global community. And I think this is our best chance to synergize. So I'm so happy to hear you say that. So I want to bring up, Lynette, with your respecting your time, one last point. You've made a very important, and I think personally a very underrated, for lack of a better term, thesis with regards to gold peg versus gold backed. And I'm referring to the stable coins and the crypto market. So I want to show you something which we think is highly significant. Just give me a moment to cue this up here. This is pretty important, Lynette. As you probably know, the SEC and Ripple have recently reached an agreement to drop the remaining appeals. They had a $125 million settlement last year, which frankly is bogus, but that's the optics. Now it's 75 million. So they chopped off a third, put it in an interest-bearing account because they don't want to waste anything. But now that Gary Gensler is not corruptly running the system anymore, and they actually have somebody who will play ball for once under President Trump's governance, it looks very favorable for XRP to break free at some point here in the near future under a asset-backed gold token, which also Vietnam and Iraq, by the way, are doing the same thing, running parallel to the new system. So it looks like we're finally going to get a taste to see what XRP can really be without control and oversight, manipulation, but with the proper regulations to allow them to flourish without the SEC, overlord. So I guess the question is, how encouraging is that for you for what you're looking for to see XRP and coins like it in a basket backed by actual precious metals, not pegged? We haven't been able to see that because of the control and manipulation. With that off the table, do you think that gives them and other coins like them that are legitimate, of the thousands out there, a much better opportunity of actually pegging it and making it have some real and lasting worth?
As long as it is convertible. And that is the difference between backing and pegging, because
Right.
using those terms interchangeably,
Mhm.
I can get behind a truly gold-backed cryptocurrency. You don't
Mhm.
have to necessarily do it, but if you want to, you need to have the ability to pull the physical metal. Or, we're hearing a lot about a whole bunch of asset-backed cryptocurrencies, not just with gold, but with other things. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to say again, if you can have access to the underlying asset that is supposed to back this cryptocurrency, then that's something that I can get behind. I think that we have to really make sure, though, that they don't really mean pegged when they're saying backed, because that's
Right.
different.
That's a delineation. That's why I specified that point. So let's question and a comment. The comment being, so you're talking about going to get your physical or digital paycheck. And if you wanted to take a percentage of gold and silver and get it back, you would be able to do that like the olden days. Is that what you mean by convertible?
Sure, absolutely. Or even if I didn't really need it, but then I decided that I wanted to give my grandson, an ounce of gold, and I had it in that asset back, but I want to give him the physical metal. I want to be able to take possession of it. So you don't
Yes.
have to take possession of it. You just have to have the ability to take possession
Convert it.
easily.
Yeah. Which brings me to my sort of, call it what you want, question/comment. It seems somewhat paradoxical in it because I think one of the ways that we're going to see that convertibility, if you like, is from the banks. It's like we have met the enemy and it is us. So in ETF, crypto adoption, stable coin adoption, the banks are doing it. You've got Basel III compliance where they have to show their assets, which could be another reason why we're seeing branches close up, because those certain banks in certain locations don't have the liquidity, and maybe the powers that be have decided from vis-a-vis the Treasury that these banks that are specifically wholly tasked to be wealth management centers will actually be the places that will have the physical and digital gold and silver adoption to do that. So the banks, while the problem, might be converted to be the solution to being the asset-backed convertibility that we're looking for. Is that possible?
Anything is possible, John.
Well, of course.
Possible. And, we are living, again, this is the most interesting time that we could ever been alive.
Yeah.
The only other time that really might parallel it is the Industrial Revolution. We're going into a digital revolution.
Yes.
Like everything, change. There's good parts and there's bad parts. So you
Right.
want to be as protected as you possibly can from those bad parts. So at least as we're making this transition, you got to hold it. Because if you don't hold it, you don't
own it.
I mean, honestly, it truly is that simple. It truly is.
No, I agree with that. We're exploring the space of this particular transitory process. Let me rephrase that to say, to your point, which you're right, is I'm trying to say how I want to say this. As the people become the solution, as we synergize and galvanize in this critical window that we're being given, we could actually de facto force said banks, if they want to work with us, to make them convertible assets as part of the solution as we galvanize. And I think that might be the best way to do it.
I think so. I mean, we have to demand it. They're not going to volunteer it.
Right.
So we have to demand it. And that's why coming together in community is so important, because what can one person do? Nothing. Their pockets are so much deeper and they have so much more influence. But if we come together in community, now we're a force, and they have to listen to us. They have to hear us, and we have to take our power back. We have to demand it.
Yeah, which is, I think, the ultimate goal of our channels is to galvanize people to wake up, to take action, and there's more of us than them. And as we unify, that's how we neutralize their agenda. So
exactly, and that's why I'm here. That's why you and I are doing this.
Exactly.
Because we need to get this voice out to as many people as possible. Because a lot of times, well, for many, many years, there is a gold rush that has started. So I'm not sure that people feel as much about this, but a lot of times people that were in this sector and accumulating gold and accumulating silver. I mean, what do they call us? They call us gold bugs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really derogatory, right? And I can tell you, many in my family used to look at me like I had 4 heads. Oh, well, that's just Lynette. I do my work and I study it, and I'll take an educated opinion over hopium any day of the week.
Well, the Bible says, Lynette, those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will get the knowledge, right? And people perish because of a lack of knowledge. And so, again, that's what we're here to do, is counteract. But we're not looking so conspiratorial anymore, are we? Because as time marches on, it just goes to prove the point that future proves past. Yep. So as always, Lynette, as we close the podcast today, where can people find your work, and last thoughts you have for the audience, please?
Well, I'll do the last thoughts first, which is, if you've been procrastinating, stop, because we are definitely running out of time. I think everybody can see everything is really speeding up. You can find me at LynetteZang.com, on YouTube and Twitter at The Lynette Zang, on Instagram and Facebook at Lynette Zang. I also sit on the advisory board of the Sound Money Movement, which is great. You can go into that website and you can see all of the different states and where they are in terms of getting gold and silver legalized. And you can always call us, because we love human contact, 833-GLD-ZANG, or translated 833-453-9264.
Wonderful. As always, Lynette, I enjoy our conversations. Thanks for being here and providing your cogency and time. Lynette Zang, thanks for joining the podcast, and we look forward to having you again in the near future.
Yeah, I look forward to it too, John.
Take care.